All right, golfers, are you trying to shallow the club, but you're struggling with shanks as you work through this? This is a very common experience that I see with players who are trying to shallow the club, is that they'll tell me every single time they do it, they hit it off the hosel, ball squirts off low and to the right. Obviously, this can be very scary for a player because then the next shot, they're immediately going to think that they're going to be worried about hitting a shank. It's hard to commit. You go to the golf course, then you start worrying about the misses on both sides. It becomes a problem, right? So, of course, if you're somebody who is way too steep into the downswing and you're cutting across the ball and your shaft movement is not very efficient, we always want that club to then work into a better spot on the way down, shallowing it out more effectively, getting this club on a better plane so that we can strike the ball from a much more efficient position, as opposed to like the club head being out here, which you'll see in virtually no high-level players. So we do want to shallow the club, especially for most of you who are way too steep and over the top of it. But there comes a point where we need to talk about if you're doing that and you're hitting the hosel. So we're going to talk about that now. Okay, so in my experience, most people who shallow the club, they're going to do it in a way that will expose the club face, and they don't offset the face angle enough to begin with. So what does that mean? It means that I'll stand here. My club face might look like it's in a very good kind of neutral position at the top, maybe even a little bit closed. But then everybody's trying to just drop this club head behind him. And when they do it with a lot of forearm rotation, meaning if I stand here and I am trying to shallow this club by rerouting my forearms this way, so that would be to my right for me as a righty, well, I can take a club face that's very, very close, almost even shut here. And if I rotate my forearms enough to shallow this club, my club face can still look open coming down. Take a look at that. I'll kind of put it here, right? You can see the toe is hanging way back here. Remember, this is a golfer whose club face was shut here, shut there, but then I added a lot of forearm rotation to shallow the club. Well, now my face angle is wide open, and of course, coming into the ball, if I'm wide open, the first point of contact will oftentimes be the heel. And so if you're doing it through a lot of forearm rotation, you have to be careful because you need to offset what the forearm rotation is going to do to the club face naturally. It's going to open it. And so in a situation like that, well, you need to be careful where if you're going to take the forearms and rotate them to get this club in a better spot, you might need to also be manipulating the wrist mechanics to ensure that the club face is staying in a strong enough position so that we don't expose the heel coming into impact. And doing that, if I get these knuckles down, for example, and get the wrist flattening out as I'm rotating my forearms, so I'm blending those two feels together, well, that'll also help me create a little bit more lean to the shaft at the same time at the bottom, so it can really help a player. And so if you're going to rotate the forearms, make sure that, number one, it's not happening so severely that the club face is getting too open, and number two, make sure, of course, that the club face is strong enough at the top. If the club face is already barely square at the top, and then I create a lot of forearm rotation, well, that face angle is going to be wide open coming down. It doesn't work. And then number three, if you need some additional help with the wrist mechanics coming down, use it to your advantage because you can. And a lot of players don't do that very efficiently. So that's the number one reason I see golfers hit shanks. And to be honest, even if you're going to use the trail arm to your advantage to try to shallow the club, I'll see that same problem. So what that basically means is, like, we talk about internal versus external shoulder rotation. Think of it as in like flying disconnected elbow in the downswing versus elbow working in front of you and more pinched in. Well, if I do that movement enough to shallow the club, this movement here, so you can see my elbow driving down and in front of me, well, again, club face can be in a stronger position. If I do that enough, well, again, the club face looks a little open coming down here. So a lot of the shallowing mechanisms a player will use to their advantage to reroute the club to the inside will expose the club face. And so, of course, it serves you no advantage having the club in a better spot if the face angle is wide open and then I'm not squaring it up at the bottom. And obviously, in this case, the golfer might need a lot of forearm rotation, which is not necessarily good for a lot of players either. So we have to be careful with how we are going about shallowing the club. So just use that knowledge to your advantage, meaning if you're going to shallow the club through the elbow working in front of you or through some element of wrist and forearm movements to help you get there, make sure you are also working the wrist angles to close this club face. Make sure your grip is strong enough if need be. Make sure the club face is in a strong enough position at the top before coming down, trying to shallow the club. There are other scenarios in which the club face doesn't necessarily get affected as much. So for example, if I am not somebody who needs to necessarily reroute it through the elbow or through the forearms, and I just make sure that at the top of my backswing, my hands are flat enough, right? Making a bigger turn, getting the hands deep. This can oftentimes help a golfer to keep the club shallow, but it doesn't open the club face up nearly as much. So that part is, those are the golfers that kind of get away with it a little bit easier. Now, if for whatever reason you are somebody who needs to reroute or manipulate the club coming down and you're hitting it off the hosel, even if you feel like the club face is in a good position, then as you are working to shallow the club, just create an obstruction there that helps you while you're working through this process. It could be as simple as take an alignment stick. You have a golf ball on the ground here looking somewhat near your target. Place an alignment stick immediately outside this golf ball. I'll have players do this a lot who shallow the club because obviously they fear the hosel, right? And now you have ball on the ground. You have alignment stick just outside the golf ball going, let's say, towards your target. I didn't align it perfectly here, but you get the idea. And then from here, well, of course, if I'm hitting it off the hosel, you can assume my club head is extending beyond the golf ball coming into impact, which makes me hit the heel of the club. I would make contact with the stick. So it's as simple as, in these cases, let's keep working through the same shallowing feels you're doing, whether that be forearms, wrist mechanics, trail arm. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But as you're working to shallow this club, obviously, number one goal is to ensure the club face stays close coming down as you do it. And then number two, let's just miss this alignment stick. And if I do this really well and I miss the alignment stick, it's a very simple idea, but it prevents me from hitting it off the heel as I'm working to shallow the club. So just a preventative method to ensure that you're still making good contact on the golf ball. So just something to consider as you're working to shallow the shaft out and the downswing if you're too steep or over the top, but you're exposing the heel a lot of times as you do it.